Let me ask you something. When was the last time you made a simple decision without playing out every possible outcome in your mind? When was the last time someone said something to you and you didn't spend the next 3 hours analyzing what they really meant? When was the last time you went to bed with a quiet mind instead of replaying conversations, rethinking choices, and rehearsing scenarios that will probably never happen? If you're struggling to remember, you're not alone, because there's a whole group of people who live inside their heads more than they live in the world. People who can turn a 2-second interaction into a 2-hour internal investigation. People who see every decision as a crossroads and every silence as a signal. You might know someone like this. Maybe you are someone like this. And here's the question that always lingers. Why? Why would anyone choose to carry the weight of 1,000 possibilities when one reality is hard enough? It's easy to assume that people who overthink are just anxious, neurotic, or incapable of letting things go. But that's not the full picture. Beneath the surface, there's an entire psychology at play. One that speaks to survival, intelligence, and a mind that refuses to be caught off guard. Because whether we admit it or not, overthinking isn't just noise. For some people, it's protection. It's a way of preparing for a world that once hurt them when they weren't ready. See, overthinkers don't think too much because they're broken. They think too much because at some point, thinking saved them. Their mind learned that anticipating every angle, every reaction, every consequence was the only way to stay safe. And once the brain learns that pattern, it doesn't easily unlearn it. It becomes the default, the background hum, the constant companion. Psychologists have found something fascinating about people who overthink. They often score higher on measures of intelligence, creativity, and emotional sensitivity. They're not stuck in their heads because they lack awareness. They're stuck because they have too much of it. Their brains process more, notice more, and feel more. And in a world that moves fast and demands quick answers, that depth can feel like a curse. But here's what's misunderstood. Overthinking isn't one thing. It's not a single pattern with a single cause. Some people overthink because life taught them to. Others overthink because their minds are wired to see patterns everywhere. And some overthink because the alternative, acting without thinking, once led to consequences they're still recovering from. Let me break it down. The trauma overthinker. Some people overthink because their nervous system learned that danger hides in the details. Maybe they grew up in an environment where moods shifted without warning, where a parent's silence could mean anything from disappointment to rage, where the wrong word at the wrong time could turn a calm evening into chaos. So the child learned to scan, to read faces, to measure tone, to predict what might happen next, so they could brace for it or avoid it. That's not overthinking, that's hypervigilance. It's the brain's way of saying, if I can see it coming, I can survive it. And that same person, now an adult, still carries that scanner. They replay conversations looking for hidden meanings because once upon a time, hidden meanings mattered. They spiral over small interactions because their nervous system remembers when small things weren't small. They overthink because their mind is still trying to keep them safe from a threat that no longer exists. For them, overthinking isn't a choice. It's a reflex. And the cruel irony? The more they try to stop, the louder it gets. Because the brain interprets their frustration as proof that something is wrong, which triggers more analysis, which creates more frustration. It's an exhausting loop, the creative overthinker. Then there's another group, the people who overthink because their minds are built to explore possibilities. These are the creatives, the strategists, the storytellers, the ones who don't just see what is, they see what could be. For them, a single question doesn't have one answer, it has 12. A conversation isn't just an exchange of words. It's a web of implications, interpretations, and potential meanings. They don't overthink because they're afraid. They overthink because their brain finds patterns, connections, and possibilities everywhere. This is the mind that can write a novel, solve a complex problem, or design something no one's thought of yet. But it's also the mind that can turn "what do you want for dinner?" into an existential crisis. Because when your brain is wired to see all the angles, it doesn't know how to stop at just one. Psychologists call this cognitive complexity. It's the ability to hold multiple perspectives at once, to see nuance where others see simplicity. It's a gift, but it's also exhausting. Because while everyone else has moved on, the creative overthinker is still 3 layers deep, exploring a thought no one else even noticed. The perfectionist overthinker. And then there's the perfectionist, the person who overthinks because they're terrified of making the wrong choice. For them, every decision feels like a test. Every mistake feels like proof of inadequacy. So they analyze and reanalyze and analyze again, hoping that if they think long enough, hard enough, the perfect answer will appear. But here's the trap. Perfection isn't a destination. It's a moving target. So no amount of thinking ever feels like enough. They overthink the email before sending it. They overthink the text after sending it. They overthink what they said, what they didn't say, and what they should have said instead. And beneath all that thinking is a quiet fear. The fear that if they get it wrong, they'll be judged, rejected, seen as less than. So they try to think their way to safety. But safety never comes. Because the more they overthink, the more doubts they create. And the more doubts they create, the more they need to think. This is the paradox of the perfectionist overthinker. They believe that thinking more will lead to clarity. But instead, it leads to paralysis. They become so afraid of making the wrong move that they stop moving altogether. The empathetic overthinker. There's one more type, the person who overthinks because they care deeply about how others feel. These are the empaths, the people who absorb the emotions of everyone around them. They overthink not because they're self-centered, but because they're other-centered. They replay a conversation wondering if they said something that hurt someone. They analyze a friend's tone, searching for signs of upset. They overthink their actions because they're terrified of being the cause of someone else's pain. For them, overthinking is an act of love. It's their way of trying to be better, kinder, more considerate. But the cost is high, because while they're busy worrying about everyone else's feelings, they forget to check in on their own. They exhaust themselves trying to read minds, anticipating needs, and managing emotions that aren't even theirs to manage. And here's the painful truth. Despite all that care, despite all that effort, they still worry they're not enough, because no amount of overthinking can ever guarantee that you'll get it right. People are unpredictable, emotions are complex, and sometimes, no matter how much you think, you can't control how someone else feels. All of these types, the trauma survivor, the creative, the perfectionist, the empath, they all share something in common. They've all learned that the world is not simple, that beneath the surface there's always more meaning, more risk, more to consider. And maybe that's not wrong. Maybe overthinkers see things other people miss. Maybe their depth, their caution, their sensitivity are not flaws, but features. Adaptations born from experience, intelligence, or care. But here's where it gets complicated. Because while overthinking can be a sign of depth, it can also become a prison. When you spend so much time in your head, you stop living in the moment. You stop trusting yourself. You stop taking risks because the fear of getting it wrong becomes louder than the desire to try. And slowly, overthinking shifts from protection to paralysis, from awareness to anxiety, from intelligence to imprisonment. There's something deeply ironic about overthinkers. They analyze everything except the overthinking itself. They'll replay a conversation 50 times, but won't stop to ask, why am I doing this? What am I really afraid of? Because underneath all that thinking is often a core belief, a belief that if they just think hard enough, they can avoid pain, avoid rejection, avoid failure, avoid being caught off guard. But life doesn't work that way. You can't think your way into certainty. You can't analyze your way into safety. And the more you try, the more exhausted you become. Psychologists have studied this. They've found that chronic overthinking, what they call rumination, is strongly linked to anxiety and depression. Not because overthinkers are broken, but because the brain isn't designed to run at full speed all the time. It needs rest, it needs moments of not knowing. It needs permission to just be, without analyzing every breath. But for the overthinker, rest feels dangerous. Because what if in that moment of stillness, they miss something important? What if they let their guard down and get hurt again? That's the trap. The mind that once protected them has now become the thing they need protection from. So what happens when an overthinker finally realizes this? When they see that their mind, for all its good intentions, has turned against them? Some try to stop thinking altogether. They distract themselves, numb themselves, or collapse into apathy. But that's not healing. That's just swapping one extreme for another. Others try to fix themselves. They read self-help books, practice meditation, force themselves to just let it go. And sometimes that helps, but often it just creates another layer of overthinking. Now they're overthinking about how much they overthink. The real shift happens when an overthinker learns something counterintuitive. That thinking isn't the problem. The problem is believing that thinking will save them, because thinking is a tool. And like any tool, it works in some situations and fails in others. You can't think your way out of grief. You can't analyze your way into love. You can't overthink your way to peace. Peace comes from something quieter, something softer. It comes from learning to sit with uncertainty without needing to solve it. It comes from trusting that you'll figure it out when you need to, not 3 weeks in advance. It comes from realizing that you don't have to have all the answers, that you're allowed to not know, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop thinking and start feeling. But let's be honest, that's easier said than done, because for the overthinker, not thinking feels like free falling. It feels reckless, dangerous, wrong. So maybe the goal isn't to stop overthinking. Maybe it's to change your relationship with it, to notice when it's helping and when it's hurting, to recognize when your mind is solving a real problem versus when it's just spinning in circles. Because here's the truth. You don't need to overthink to be prepared. You don't need to analyze every conversation to be kind. You don't need to replay every mistake to learn from it. Most of the time, the answer is simpler than your mind wants it to be. Most of the time, people mean what they say. Most of the time, the thing you're worried about won't happen. And even if it does, you'll handle it. Not because you thought about it in advance, but because you're more capable than your overthinking mind gives you credit for. That's what overthinkers forget. They're so focused on preparing for the worst that they forget they've survived every worst-case scenario they've ever faced. They've already proven they can handle uncertainty. They just don't trust it yet. There's a certain beauty in the mind of an overthinker, though, a depth that shallow thinkers will never understand. They see the world in layers. They notice the things that others gloss over. They feel deeply, care intensely, and process thoroughly. In a world that often moves too fast, that skims the surface, that mistakes loudness for confidence, the overthinker is a reminder that depth still matters. That some questions don't have quick answers. That some experiences deserve to be felt fully, not rushed through. The overthinker is the person who remembers what you said 6 months ago. The one who notices when you're off, even when you're smiling. The one who sees the beauty in small things because they pay attention. But that same depth, that same awareness, can also be a burden. Because when you see everything, you carry everything. And sometimes the weight becomes too much. So maybe the question isn't, how do I stop overthinking? Maybe it's, how do I think without drowning in it? How do I honor my depth without losing myself in it? Here's what that might look like. It starts with recognizing that not every thought deserves your attention. Your brain will offer you 1,000 what-ifs, but you don't have to take them all seriously. Some thoughts are just noise, static. The mind doing what minds do, it continues with learning to separate thinking from feeling. Sometimes you're not overthinking because there's a real problem. You're overthinking because there's an emotion you're avoiding. Anxiety, grief, anger, loneliness. And your mind, in its attempt to protect you, creates a mental puzzle to distract you from what you're really feeling. But emotions don't disappear because you think about them. They disappear when you feel them. When you stop analyzing why you're sad and just let yourself be sad. When you stop figuring out why you're anxious and just acknowledge that you are. And maybe most importantly, it means learning to trust yourself again. To trust that you don't need to have it all figured out, that you can make a decision without knowing every outcome, that you can say something without rehearsing it 12 times, that you're allowed to be human, messy, imperfect, and still worthy. Because that's what overthinkers really need to hear. You're allowed to get it wrong. You're allowed to not have the answer. You're allowed to be uncertain, confused, and still okay. The world needs overthinkers. It needs people who think before they speak, who consider consequences, who see the complexity in situations that others reduce to black and white. But the world also needs you to be free. Free from the prison of your own mind. Free to act without overanalyzing. Free to trust that you're enough, even when you're not sure. So if you're someone who overthinks everything, know this. You're not broken. You're not weak. You're not too much or too sensitive or too intense. You're someone whose mind learned to protect you the only way it knew how. And that worked for a while. But you don't need that level of protection anymore. You're safe now, or at least safer than your mind believes. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to let yourself rest. Not forever, not in a way that makes you careless or disconnected, but in a way that reminds you that life is meant to be lived, not endlessly rehearsed in your head. Because the people who overthink everything often forget one simple truth. Some of the best moments in life happen when you stop thinking and start being. When you let the conversation flow without analyzing it. When you make the choice without knowing if it's right. When you trust that you'll figure it out as you go. That's not recklessness. That's not ignorance. That's freedom. And you deserve that. You deserve to think less and feel more. To worry less and live more. To analyze less and trust more. You've spent so long protecting yourself from everything that could go wrong. Maybe it's time to let yourself experience everything that could go right. And that starts not with thinking harder, but with thinking less. Not with having all the answers, but with being okay without them. Because you're more than your thoughts. You're more than your worries. You're more than the endless loop inside your head. You're a person who's been trying so hard to get it right that you forgot it's okay to just be. So maybe, just for today, let yourself be. Let your mind rest. Let the questions go unanswered. Let the what-ifs fade into the background. And notice what happens when you do. You might find that the world doesn't fall apart, that people still like you, that you're still capable, still worthy, still enough. And maybe, just maybe, you'll remember what it feels like to be present, to be here, to be alive, not in your head, but in your life. That's the gift waiting on the other side of overthinking. Not a perfect mind, not a quiet mind, but a free one. And that freedom? It's been inside you all along. You just had to stop thinking long enough to feel it.